sort of byproduct of all that has been the experience with major regional dance companies in Pittsburgh, Boston, Pennsylvania, and Hartford, most recently. And the issues of how those companies deal with live music or do not deal with live music. And when I talk about the sociology of this, what I mean is that the dance culture on one side and the musician culture on the other side tend to be like different nationalities. It's sort of like the Balkan states in some ways, who are coexisting in the same space, but really perceive things in very different ways. Not just in terms of the things you imagine, like vocabulary. You know, we all talk about phrases. We say the violins what's a phrase, they don't say anything like what the dancers say. But I'm also talking about things like the concept, forget about the fact that there's enough money. Things like the concept of time, how do you fill time? Anyone in the theater, not just in dance, their idea of time is that it's endless. And then you get up in the morning, and once you've got your engine started, you work all day until you collapse and you go to sleep. That's what dancers do. Musicians, it starts on the hour and has a break, an hour and 20 minutes. And when it's over, you get up and you leave. So, one of the things that I've discovered over the years is that there is no simple way of reconciling those two worldviews and those two time views. The theater lives in a kind of sacred time, and at least professional musicians who belong to the union live in secular time. So, as the music director, one of your jobs is to try to bridge the gap and translate between these two views of the universe. Family model. Money becomes the great red herring. You know? And what I have found is in working in a very idealistic way with young, energetic dancers, young choreographers, young composers, musicians, what we have tried to do is, not always successful, is create an environment in which there is a greater flexibility on the music side and perhaps a little more discipline about these things on the dance side, so that people do understand that everyone has their needs and their way of working, which they're comfortable with. And I also have to say that I'm feeling in the ballet world, which is very stylized and formalized. Perhaps this might be different in modern troops and experimental troops. And I'm also dealing with the assumption of an orchestra, if not the reality of an orchestra, rather than the assumption of a few live players. And just one other thing I'd like to add to all this. The great fear that I have with all of this and the economic things that impinge upon this, with this sort of cultural clash that's going on, is that there are a generation of choreographers and dancers who have already basically gotten used to not working with live music. They simply don't know what that is and they don't know how to do it.
obviously you'd be able to pay people properly and so forth. But to get them out of being relegated to sitting in the pit and you keeping the temple, which addresses God's question. I have come to a conclusion at this point in my career, which is really very limited experience in comparison to what my colleagues have done, that tempo, that speed is only one part of the issue of tempo. That if you hit 84 the quarter note on the money, us with this quality, this is the performance that they like, it's the Berlin Philharmonic, it's going to, why not use it? And all of a sudden, you're faced with a whole new set of questions, which I think, following up what Stanley said, in addition to re-educating funders on how to fundraise, to separate these piles, is to come up with a bullish, a policy. Why is this necessary? Because if we can't articulate it without saying, oh, well, it feels wonderful, then how can we expect, a funder to come on board?
But if I could, I think the first thing we have to do, and I agree with you, and we spend a lot of our time in this so that begins to reify this really terrible performance becomes the performance, and no matter how much you warn the choreographer and work with them and say to the dancers, it's not going to be like this. It's going to sound different. And the worst is a MIDI version of something where all of the dynamics have been pumped way up and it's incredibly compressed and what's a cello line now sounds like so we go, where is that booming thing?
Exactly.
I have to go, and I'm really, really sorry. I might bet.
Meditate with my last piece. And it does go.
I got a question. You know what really drives me nuts is amplified stuff. Amplified live music. Okay, now I've just been in New York this last year, and I've been to these dance performances with live music, and every time it's been amplified. Now, it sounds dead as hell somehow because of that, and they figure, well, what the hell? Am I going to take? It's coming through the same speakers, and it almost sounds better when you're playing it from a CD than when you're amplifying it live. Why does this happen? You guys tell me, because you guys are in charge.
I think, well, I want to.
I have to object to saying you guys are in charge.
Okay. That's what I want.
I am not in charge of the soundboard when I am in front of an orchestra. I have no idea what the person in charge of the soundboard is.
Who found
And that goes, I'm talking years and years.
Whoever got, how did it ever get in? The soundboards were in with live music. I'm assuming.
Well,
anybody comes to you for consultation, it does happen. As little space, if any, as possible under the stage. I try to tell you that the orchestra under the stage. Well, I have conducted many, many times in many years under the stage. It's no bargain. Try to, if anybody comes to you, and I understand that appears to be in the open many places. Any feedback that you can give
some education is also in order for them when we have perhaps rock and roll leaders and say, oh man, I'm going to push the bass, it's going to sound great. The highs are really rocking. And it's Prokofiev, you know. And we had a situation, again, this was a Juilliard with Prokofiev piano concerto and 50-piece orchestra and Red in the pit, which created a whole new set of problems because the pianist needed to be heard above the orchestra. She was buried in the middle of this massive sound. So we started to adjust
no money. Waiting for that review, and it goes on, and the last line says, also included.
Not even that. Not all to work. Some musicians,
We're there.
yeah. Because, unfortunately, many dance critics, and I won't mention names, are not qualified to comment on the musical part of the performance.
And music critics
But
Even if I
Music critics won't come.
No.
We are ostracized. We are, we're musicians doing our thing. We're good musicians, and we have this entire other sort of baggage that we have to learn, which is how a dancer moves, how to breathe with a dancer, how to really, support them and give them what they need musically. And yet, no music press will ever come to our performance. I mean, Lucia has been out there writing great, great music. And music press doesn't know what she isn't.
Yeah, the old timers, she's got her fans and stuff. Also, again, I hate to keep harping this one point, but in the early stages, education is still possible. The Hawkins Company has educated one of the New York Times critics about the music. We get mentioned always in at least one review. It may only be mentioned, but at least it's something. And the other thing that, depending on the relationship with your company, especially if you're a university and there's access to local press, is set up an opportunity to educate your critic or if someone's writing a review. I did a production of West Side Story, a very large summer stock company. It was in Wichita. This was last summer. This is a 3,000 seat theater, $1.2 million budget, 95% subscription. This is a big deal. We did West Side Story, and I said to the producer, can I come to the press because we're focusing a lot on the marriage of music, movement, and within the context of the play. And you get up there and you relax a little philosophical, and you talk about tension being created, the other one spoken, and every touch is reflected. All the things that we all know and are try to be sensitive about. And all of a sudden, you open the newspaper the next day, and there it is in print, 2 or 3 sentences about the marriage of music and movement. And then this was the great payoff was in the review. It was still in the last column, in the last place where the law was relegated to, but it said that she said every musical gesture on stage was reflected in the music. And you know,
when did we start our next one? Suppose it was 2:30.
2:30 was supposed to be. Just about 20 minutes from now. I have just a suggestion. I have a list of some restaurants that are in the nearby area which I could give you to hold on to.
Let's go make it 45 minutes for lunch. Be here at quarter of 3 back. Time to start. So, my name is Robert Benford, and it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel today to talk about funding in the future or whatever else seems appropriate, related subjects. So, let me tell you who we have here. This is Mr. Ivan Segura. Ivan runs a performing arts service organization very well known in New York called Pentacle, which he will tell you a little bit about. But let me read to you about Ivan. Ivan Segura joined Pentacle in 1976 after a first career teaching French language and literature at various colleges in the Northeast. He was a contributing editor to Market the Arts publication and the second and third editions of the Poor Dancer's Almanac, which was published by DTW, and has written articles for various arts publications. He directed Pentacle's National Choreography Project and more recently conceived and directed its National Dance Repertory Enrichment Program. He's been a selection panelist for state and regional arts organizations and councils around the country. He is a former National Endowment for the Arts Dance Program and Inter-Arts panelist and continues to serve as a consultant. He is a past secretary and board member of Dance USA, the national service organization for nonprofit professional dance. Nonprofit professional dance, I like that. And a past president and board member of the National Association of Performing Arts Managers and Agents, and served 3 terms on the board of the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. Thank you, Joe. Beverly Deanne joined the staff of the New York State Council of the Arts in October 1977 and assumed the position of director of the dance program at NISCA, as it's known, in Arts, in 1980. Prior to that, she was for 6 years administrative associate for the National Association of Regional Ballet and project director of the NARB's Craft Choreographer Conferences, which where's Rob? Rob Kaplan is a veteran of those to many. A love of dance and the dedication to the furtherance of the highest standards of artistic quality within the art form have occupied Ms. Deanne from her earliest years to the present. She began ballet training at the age of 3, studying in Denver, Colorado, with Lillian Cushing, one of the pioneer American dance teachers. Later, she came to New York City to study at the School of American Ballet, and with such well-known teachers as Valentina, a number of illustrious Russian teachers. An injury brought an end to a brief performing career with American Ballet Theater. Ms. Deanne, who was the recipient of the Dance Notation Bureau's Distinguished Service Award in 1990, is a graduate of Sarah Lawrence College. Carmen Moore is a composer with a wide stylistic background. His works have been performed by a number of major symphony orchestras, including the New York Philharmonic, the San Francisco Symphony, and the Cleveland Orchestra. He is an artist in residence at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine and is the founder and director of Sky Music Ensemble, which is an electroacoustic contemporary chamber music group. He is the master composer of the Young Choreographers and Composers in Residence program at American Dance Festival, and he has produced dance scores for such choreographers as Alvin Ailey, Martin Clark, Ruby Shang, Garth Fagan, and Donald Byrd. A major new work entitled Mass for the 21st Century was commissioned by and performed at Lincoln Center in the summer of 1994. Carmen Moore. And Tracy Williams. Tracy has run the Composers Choreographers Project at Vita
interest to them. So they're going to talk about those things. I will ask them questions, and they'll talk about that. We'll start with that. They're all encouraged to join in, and we'll just let the conversation go to where it wants to go. In about the last 20 minutes, I hope, or well, maybe 10, I don't know, 15. At any rate, we'll have a chance to take questions from the audience at that time. However, if a totally burning desire to ask an important question just comes to you, put your hand up and we'll see what we can do. So I thought we would start with Carmen, because Carmen, as a composer, it was my judgment that his experience was the closest to many of us here, many of you. So the question for Carmen is, Carmen, has funding, or a lack thereof, had any significant impact on the types of works that you've chosen to develop, or the way you've developed them? And what strategies have you adopted to overcome these obstacles?
Okay, thank you. Well, when I first came to New York to study composition, I thought that composing would have afforded a comfortable life with plenty of time to plenty of money for vacations and all of these wonderful things. And I thought that's what I was seeing. It was 1958, believe it or not, and I came directly from Ohio State University and studied with Paul Overton privately for 4 years, worked at the New York Public Library. I think my yearly salary there was something like $4,000 or something like that. And I actually felt okay. I was comfortable, and there were plenty of funds from foundations and here and there, more than I had time to write it and send away for. And I thought that I had a really viable career here, just as someone who was working in any other business. And for a while, it was quite nice. I think was written about in some book about funding as an example of someone who knew how to go out and get a grant and keep music going, keep my music going. I don't know if I've just gotten lazy and haven't noticed something or other, but the whole thing felt like it fell apart at a certain point. And a career that I had thought was going to have a lot of orchestra pieces in it, and it has had a fair number of orchestra pieces in it, but in operas and all of that sort of thing, soon found itself centered around chamber music. And not only just chamber music, but I found that the only way I could keep the ship afloat, which means to always be writing a piece of music, was to start my own ensemble, and that's how the Sky Music Ensemble got started. Over the years, what's happened is it's come to such a turn that in the last 2 years, this wonderful organization that I put together, which is like seven musicians that who play basically a music that is written to allow for some improvisation, sometimes a lot, sometimes a bit, but it's a very exciting organization and a very exciting project. We have not played in concerts as such in over a year, and I'm really very troubled about that, because I've shaped things and changed things and written for smaller and smaller groups of instruments. I've tried everything to just keep writing music and stay excited about writing music. At this point, it's gotten quite frightening, and so I'm
tied into that. So for instance, a lot of what you're focusing on is simply live music and dance. What interests me and what I've been most involved with is the process of making music happen that's never happened before, commissions to go with new dances that never happened before. And it's a very special subset of activity. And I think it's fraught with interesting problems. In addition to providing administrative services to these small performing arts groups, we have in the past run a couple of what we call special projects, re-grant programs. They don't exist anymore, alas, which is one of the other problems that we need to be discussing here. The first, and chronologically, was the National Choreography Project. It focused on larger repertory companies and tried to give them the resources to commission music, and in many cases, if it was the choreographer's choice, to commission music, commission dance, commission music to go with the dance. And grants were upwards of $50,000, $60,000, so it was one of those kind of magic cases that should happen to much more of you, where a composer actually had a 5-figure music commission and the resources to go into the studio with paid musicians and make it all happen. That ran its course, and it was followed in our activity by something called the National Dance Repertory Enrichment Program. You should see us tonight, so we have to sit there and invent these acronyms. But it was kind of structured the same way. Repertory companies apply, naming a choreographer they propose to work with, and that choreographer, as part of the application process, defines what they need, and again, very often, a composer commission got attached to it. So we've had accumulated a fair amount of experience dealing with setting up these collaborations and watching them play themselves out. I get very anxious when I get a certain kind of call that I get sometimes. Somebody calls up and says, "Hi, I'm a composer. I want to work with dance companies. Can I send you a tape?" Okay. To my way, I guess it's a very logical thing to do. But to my way of thinking, it's a totally ass-backwards way to start collaboration happening. Why call a manager? My artists do not come to me for ideas about any of the creative aspects of their work. They don't ask me, I can't think of a costume designer, I need a set designer. They're not going to ask me to suggest a composer. They also know I'm tone deaf. And what I say to these people is, well then, go to a dance concert. And if what you see excites you, go backstage and introduce yourself. I think part of all of us have bought into the kind of a vision of these collaborations where something organic has to be happening. Something has to start from the inside and then take spark and work. Now, we will never know if that's really how Martha Graham and Aaron Copland made Appalachian Spring happen. I'm sure that one of the reasons that Merce Cunningham and John Cage is such a famous music dance collaboration is that they're supposed to not to have talked to each other about the business of the collaboration until the curtain went up. It reminds me of the story of Winston Churchill when asked why his marriage to Clementine lasts so long. He said, "Never had breakfast together." Which actually might as well lead right into one of the things I want to talk about. These dance music collaborations come in very different topologies. I think I haven't seen Tibbetts work recently, but I think what he does with his body rhythm, working with dancers, is kind of one, not extreme, but one pure form. A solo dancer, having decided that there are no resources or time to work with large companies, working with one composer, the two together, totally in sync, totally in control of the material, and working, I assume, as equals. Or you equal one day and the other equal the other day. But it balances out. That's one over here. Way over on the other side of the spectrum of possibilities, you have a long-standing company of 16 to 20 to 30 dancers expecting to come out with 20 to 25 minutes piece, and a composer expecting to work with an orchestra or some sort of group of musicians. The choreographer is thinking of the next piece. The composer is likely is not thinking of the next CD. Okay? And there is, I think that's a typical enough situation of dreams coming together with a guaranteed to be a problem, and one way to phrase the problem is, who the hell is the producer? In the world of performing arts, there used to be producers of various sorts whose job it forced to be the producer because it's usually the dance company that comes to the table with the 501c3, which is the thing you need more often than not to do at least your basic fundraising. To go to the state council, to go to meet the composer, on and on and on. And since, as far as I can tell, most composers are not themselves incorporated. I gather you went and got an incorporation in response to a situation. Well, not every composer has done that. So basically, the composer who wants the music part to happen as much as the choreographer wants the dance part to happen needs to hang on to the choreographer's incorporation, the structure. The situation of the dance company is usually they get to go to the well once a year. For most of the dance companies we work with, it's that once a year, 1 or 2 week long New York season. And what they have to get out of that trip to the funding well is not only the composer's commission, it's the new dance, the rehearsal course, the costumes have to come from there, the set, the lighting design, and all that. So you've got over here a very needy composer, and rightfully so, really in a kind of fierce competition with all the other elements that the choreographer needs to put together and somehow pay for. Then you've got history coming in, and you've got, chances are, a choreographer with a history of not getting paid themselves, working with dancers who by then have become family, who probably don't get paid to rehearsal, who are totally at the bottom of the pecking order in terms of rehearsal rates, if there is rehearsal pay, performance rates. And then the composer is bringing to the studio or the recording studio not an equivalent family of musicians who have sacrificed with most likely a pickup orchestra, because the piece for this is different orchestration, different configuration than what was done before. And that flautist that comes into the room, let me start all over. The dancer who comes into the room for the 5th year in a row with the composer, with the choreographer, is going to be surprised if they get $20. The flautist coming into the studio with the composer is going to be surprised if they don't get union rate. That is a very big mismatch. And because there's no producers, no one's saying, don't worry, I'll make it happen. Where does that, who's bringing what ability to negotiate to the table, who's bringing what flexibility to the table? Again, in an ideal world, we didn't have to worry about money and resources. Don't worry, I'll do the music, I'll do the dance, and we'll come together and you'll see what you got. Also, because in a sense the choreographer is really the producer, you don't get that ideal equality. And I don't know if I believe in that anyway. Those of us in the dance world used to marvel a bit when, I guess 10 years ago, the Next Wave Festival seemed to specialize in these kind of collaborations. There was an era when there actually was an inter-arts program in the endowment, and they weren't ashamed of the name, when, as an ideal, these collaborations among equals who may have never met before was supposed to happen, and it has to happen by November 5th, because that's when the festival opens. I'm sure that everyone in the room has stories about those kind of forced marriages that may or may not have worked. We used to call them marriages made in Grand Heaven. Some of them were so inorganic that it was asking for trouble. But again, you had producers, and the creative personnel didn't have to worry about, we need another recording session because something didn't work, we need to change the costumes. Also, again, I'm picturing the composer imagining the next CD, but then you've got the choreographer saying, well, I need 10 more measures of that kind of stuff, or I need silence here. You can't have 5 minutes of silence on a CD. Your producer will... In other words, if you go into it imagining that what you come out with opening night is ready to be the CD, again, there's a possibility of a mismatch, an important one. And then again, when things get hairy in the studio, here's the referee. We're not even going to talk about what kinds of pieces of paper are supposed to be signed before composers and musicians with them and choreographers and dancers behind them to get together and spend what money there is. I always think that the most information is imparted in these sessions if everyone goes away thoroughly depressed. Because the zero-based thing, well, is this really what we need to be doing? Of course, you're committed to what you do, you believe in yourself, get rich, but it may turn out to be satisfying because dance and music are like that, and they're not going to get divorced. There's enough time for one.
All right.
Can I add some levity to this situation now that everyone's... Meet the Composer started the Composer Choreography Project 8 years ago in response to the fact that many composers that we encountered in our 20 years of existence have come to us asking, how do I hook up with a choreographer? How do I get paid for writing for dance? Because most dance companies barely have money to pay their dancers. So we started an initiative that was only to last 3 years, and we assumed, wrongfully so, that at the end of those 3 years, dance companies would think that commissioning a composer was so essential to their work, they would include a line item in their budgets to do so every year, at least once. And at the end of the first 3 years, I realized that that was an erroneous assumption, that I can't imagine there being a time in the near future when they'll be able to pay their dancers adequately, as Ivy mentioned. So we fought long and hard to raise money ourselves to keep this project going. And what this project does is fund the composer's fee and the choreographer's fee, and those are parity fees, which we actually got a lot of flack from initially in the dance world, saying you can't give a choreographer what a composer makes. That you're going to throw the fee structure out of whack. And what I've realized is that sometimes this is the first time a choreographer is being given a substantial amount of money to create a work, and what they're doing with that money is paying their dancers, paying for the production. So they're bringing a lot to bear on the success of the production, whereas, this is a terrible thing to say from a composer or organization point of view, but the composers aren't being required to do so because they're not the ones with the 501c3 and investing as much in the actual performance of the work. So, you're right, things need to pare down to a certain scale, but dancers and choreographers need to demand more. And I think the music community has maybe gone a little bit ahead with unions in making those demands.
Which, of course, sometimes acts as a drag on creative
without having to travel to see someone's work or, pay a ticket price, they just pay a user fee to have a look at the work. And then be able to get the biographical information and telephone number of the person. And if you're interested, anyone, in listing on this, you can call Harvest Works for information. And their number is 431-1130.
That's 212.
Yes.
We have a question.
One place you're sitting in the back was a disadvantage. But did you say that the funding for the choreographers, the choreographer receives a larger grant?
No. They receive parity fees, the composer and choreographer, but
What is the
same fee. The same
Same
fee.
thing.
And then there are copy costs included in that, and some expenses for live musical performance, because we do demand that, if it's appropriate to the nature of the music. And I didn't bring those applications because they're not printed yet, but there will be a deadline the end of September for that project. So if you're interested, you can call me.
Want to talk about the projects that Misky has been involved in?
No. Well, as director of the dance program at the State Arts Council, I deal with approximately 120 to 130 different dance companies and artists in a year. And last year, our budget was, in the dance program, was $1.8 million. We have no budget this year so far. But we will. But what you should know, and on the pessimistic note again, is that 4 years ago, the budget in the dance program was $4.1 million. So this huge decrease of 60% decrease, which is really a staggering reduction. It almost seems that it's superfluous to sit here and talk about money and budgets. And it made me remember what Martha Graham once said, and she was talking at a conference, and she said, very determined, like, you can't be stopped by money. You can only be delayed by it. And I think that's why we keep forging ahead. In the dance program, our funds basically go towards general operating support and for artist salaries, when it's project-based, for particularly dancer salaries, for companies to mount home-based seasons. But while we don't directly fund musicians in the dance program, I would say that at least 2/3 or more of the companies that we do fund are dealing or are involved with live musicians, either in the form of live musical ensembles or originally commissioned scores that they use, because it is very popular to use an originally commissioned score. One effort that I do want to talk about that emanated from the council and is definitely a success story in this case is a bringing together of dance and live musicians, and it came from the Mary Flagler Carey Charitable Trust Live Music for Dance program. And this was co-created in 1986 by the music program of the State Arts Council and the Carey Trust. And since Gail Morgan is out of town and unable to be here, and she's the director of that program at the Carey Trust, I told her I would speak about it because I think it's such a wonderful program, and I actually have been involved in it as a panelist and as an advisor from its inception right up until the present. Originally, when it began, it was called the Pocket Orchestra program, and it was an endeavor to bring live music together with small performing ensembles, both small opera groups and small dance companies. And for the first 3 years, the music program at the council gave $50,000 in each of the years as matching money towards this project. And then it was planned that the council would depart from doing that, and miracle of miracles, the Carey Trust decided that they would take it over solely themselves, and they have gone forward think it's understandable why it's diminished. However, I don't think it's acceptable. And I'm happy to say that the Cary Trust agreed with me about that. And in the last couple of years, they have raised the ceiling on their grants. They used to be basically small grants. They now do give a few grants up to $50,000 to some of the larger companies to continue to encourage them to have live music and to help make it possible to have a live orchestra for a New York City season. Now, while this is just one example, I don't think that it is the only thing that should be done. And one of the reasons that I told you that I was pleased to be asked to be on the panel is because I'm so deeply concerned about the diminishment of live music for dance. And as a former dancer, I just realize how critical it can be. I think without live music, the spontaneity is gone, there's no breath. The way it looks is flat, the way it sounds is flat when it's done with tape. And I mean, I find it, there's just a whole world missing when it's not there. I know when I attended Michael Graham's opening night, and this was a few years ago already, and there was not a smidge of live music. And I was absolutely appalled. And I began mentioning it to a few other people in the audience at intermission, and then over the course of the week during their season. I said, well, the dancers looked just fine, but it just didn't, it was just so flat sounding. And a lot of people said, oh, they didn't have live music? Oh, I didn't notice. Now, I don't know if I was more appalled at them not having live music or the fact that people weren't noticing it. I don't really believe that's true, although everybody's gotten so used to the electronic kind of media, I mean, and hearing everything amplified. So I think it does make a difference. And when Graham just did their season at BAM, the Next Wave Festival, and they performed with live music, the Radical Graham season, I think that even if people did notice, it's subliminal, that everybody was raving about how the works looked, how the company looked, and there was a difference. There was truly a difference in the whole perception of the way the works are supposed to look and the way that Martha created it, which was for live music. And I firmly believe that that's why people go to the theater. I mean, I know it's preaching to the converted here, but I think if we're going to keep live theater alive, we need that kind of live interaction between dance and music. And as Ivan said, it just isn't natural. It must continue to go on. And I have something very unpopular to say. I feel that the unions, the musicians' unions, just have made it almost impossible to enable companies to have the kind of live music that's necessary. And maybe you'll come up with some ideas, or somebody will, about how they can be approached to make concessions and to realize that we're all in this together. That it is, and I applaud them for always wanting to get paid. On the other hand, I think that we're talking about art here as well, and I think it's essential that people understand that it could just disappear altogether if there isn't cooperation and collaboration and realizing that we all believe in live art, and that's what we want to happen. And that's my plea. And maybe somebody come with an idea.
Well, there does seem to be a connection between the investment that people feel and the amount of money that they expect to be paid. If I'm trying to decide whether to take on a project as a musician, I often make myself personally, just throw this in, sort of like a scale from 0 to 100 of artistic satisfaction and a scale of 0 to 100 for financial remuneration. And if the two add up to 100 or more, I'll do the project. In other words, I have no enjoyment, but I'm paid well, I'll do it. And if I really love it and I get paid nothing, I'll do it in between. I think when we talk about musicians, I only got to see a little bit of it, but I got to see part of the Bang on a Can Contemporary Music Festival at Lincoln Center, which shows you the energy and commitment that musicians have for contemporary music. And I don't expect most of those people got paid well, if anything. So I think there seems to be something here about the nature of commitment and the interaction. Perhaps I don't know where to go with that. But it seems I'm enthusiastic type of person. Maybe these people are getting involved in situations that they don't feel enthusiastic about.
I think it's probably,
Why would that be?
what the part I'm talking about is when we get into the more major moderns and we're talking about live orchestras, where we need something more than a small ensemble.
Right.
The small ensembles, I think the commitment is there, and that's why I think the Carrie Trust also began seeing that, that's happening, and that's wonderful. On the other hand, we don't want major companies performing without live music, and that
Because the
it
scores-
suddenly changed, it turned around, it became the opposite. They always performed with live music, the little ones didn't have it. Then the scales changed because of the cost effect. And, I mean, it made an enormous difference even with a company like the Jose Limon Company, where they didn't have a beach orchestra, but they had live music at their joy season. And I think, again, the works have breadth. I mean, it's something that you want to get it. So that's why I talk about the musicians' unions. I don't think it's an individual musician. I think it's something bigger than that.
Yeah.
More or less on the same wavelength. There are a couple of factors that mitigate against choreographers and their administrators thinking it would be feasible to bring in live music or to commission music. You should remember that most dance companies really do a if that many, very brief New York seasons and really need to be touring the rest of their professional lives. If you can imagine what it might cost to get the live music to happen at the Joyce Theater or in Ethiopia or wherever the dance company is, multiply it when you think of what it would cost to bring that live music on tour. If they invest in costumes, the costumes do fit in the trunk and the piece still looks like the piece in Minneapolis. But if they have to say, there's no way I'm going to bring the band to Minneapolis, so heck, why bother? And they do, as they try to get bookings, run into the problem that the New York Review describes live music, and they're selling something that's incomplete because they can't afford to sell the whole thing. Same thing happens when people make very ambitious choices about commissioning sets that just won't fit in the van or on the plane. The presenter has to pay a lot of money anyway out there in Minneapolis or Berkeley. You say, well, why should I? I'm not even getting the real thing. I'm getting half of it. I'm missing an important part, and I'm certainly missing part of what made it so marketable or so attractive. So that if you are at the beginning of a possible relationship and you remember that and can manage to be just as much of a genius with 2 instruments as with 50, don't fight it. See if you can go that way. In a slightly related aspect, a lot of outreach is being demanded of touring dance companies. They're expected to solve a whole host of social problems. Let's say that the choreographer makes the commitment to bring you and the other musicians on tour. If you can jump in there with an appreciation of the kinds of activities that are expected of at least the dancers, and some interesting notions about how you, as a composer slash musician, and your musicians might contribute to that. Because music will be more obviously accessible out there than certain kinds of dance. You may make yourself indispensable in ways that parallel your indispensableness as an accompanist. So I invite you to think about these sort of parallel tracks of professionalism that might help make more regular work for you. The other thing I thought I'd jump in with is bloody nuisance is what it is. You're going to find that as you get to pursue collaborations, at least with dance companies who are incorporated in New York State, you're going to start to hear things that you never heard before. There's no time to go into it, but I just want to introduce it so that you're prepared for it. In 1986, the Benighted Legislature issued what they simply called a clarification regarding employment regulations. Clarification says basically, if you're working in the performing arts in New York State, there is no such thing as an independent contractor. Guess what every one of you is used to being, likes to be, and is hell-bent on remaining, an independent contractor. But you've got the auditor from the department later telling the administrator of the dance company, no way. You at least are talking to the choreographer, and I as administrator can sit you down and reason with you. But it's up to you to take the knowledge of that situation and the appreciation of its reality to your musicians. You really don't want to hear from them. What? Withholding taxes? What are you talking about? say I won't, but the penalties and fines that the dance company will get stuck with, and these days probably will get stuck with, matter.
One thing that I think is real dangerous about that, there is a case in the California courts right now within the music industry that says that as a work for hire, that the employer also has to pay benefits. And that can certainly change the music industry. And then this is what I'm hearing now, is all of a sudden now the dance company, this is,
There are ways out, I'll just allude to them. I once was undergoing an audit where we ran afoul of this, and the auditor sent out a question. This music, I see you wrote a $1,000 check. Is this music, is this a product or a service? I finally figured it out, took a week. Is this a piece of music that the choreographer is taking off the shelf because it suits him or her and using? Or is it something that's, even if it's not legally a work for hire, which has consequences for the copyright, is the choreographer saying, no, 4 more measures here, a measure of silence there, and that would clearly define an employment relationship. So even if you're hoping what the choreographer says, 6 more measures of that, you've got to all pretend that that isn't the situation. The way out is licensing. That's what I figured out. If you're a composer and you just died, I'm sorry to hear it, but I do have to license the use of the work from your estate. Okay? So the Department of Labor can't talk about my contribution to unemployment insurance because he's not coming back from the dead to go to the employment office. Now he's very old and infirm, and I'm using the music he wrote 20 years ago. The people who come and do the audit are not rocket scientists. In other words, the key is not to hire you to be a composer, but to license your score. It's a different kind of income entirely, and it's removed from the whole business of unemployment insurance and workers' comp, because contracted fees are subject to workers' comp. So in other words, the way it works is, for my trained dance companies, fringe average is about 28%, because they're the most expensive category in all the rates. That means if I thought I had $100 to give Tigger for his choreography commission, either one of 2 things. I have to have $128 in the bank, which I don't, or I have to remember, did I say 100? I really meant 74. If it's 74 plus 28%, 74 equals 100 I have. Basically, even though the law says you are not supposed to pay these things, you are paying them because there's no place else where the money is coming from. The only reason I'm bringing this up is if the choreographer or administrator of dance companies you're starting to work with start making noises that sound like what I just said, they're not being greedy, they're not being stupid, they're not trying to pick on you. They're just dealing with reality. And you as professional musicians in the dance and music field need to know what's at issue and make an effort to understand it, and then pass that understanding on to your violinist and your horn players and all the rest of it. That's very depressing and very annoying, and it does no good to say, but it doesn't make sense.
Is it happening in all states? Is it happening in all
It
states?
seems to be happening a lot in California. It's happening in the states where choreographers' ways because of rhythmic things that maybe aren't in there. In other words, a choreographer with a piece of full of dance music has a lot of leeway about energy levels, about where the dancers go, about how many, which is very different from dancing to, I don't know. And I think I think they call them new wave composers, Wyndham Hill kind of thing. A lot of choreographers enjoy dancing to that kind of music because in a different way it stays out of the way while being perfectly lovely and interesting. So there's a little double whammy there. If you find that a choreographer just is dying to work with you, there may be a backhanded,